We're going to discuss something about direct and indirect language today. It's important to use indirect language in OET speaking to demonstrate a respectful attitude towards your patients. The difference between direct and indirect language is politeness. We soften the instructions or we soften the questions when we're speaking to patients on uncomfortable topics or on sensitive topics, something that they might feel uncomfortable talking about. And we use this in questioning as well as while giving instructions. So it's important that you understand how you can convert a direct statement or a question to an indirect statement or a question and use it in OET speaking. Now, if you look at the screen, we'll first discuss the difference of how an indirect language differs from a direct statement or a question. For example, let's say I tell somebody to get me a glass of water. I can say it in two ways. I can say, get me a glass of water. And that's imperative. That can be subjugating. It sounds a little dominating. It may offend the other person as well. Or I could make it polite. I could soften this question. I could ask, could you please get me a glass of water? And that's indirect language. So indirect questions or statements are used for politeness because they sound less intrusive. They sound less authoritative. And we're going to use that in OET speaking. In all of the role plays, when you're speaking to patients who are withdrawn or who are uncommunicative or who might be embarrassed about talking on certain topics like obesity or questions about personal topics like sexual life or weight problems and so on. So there we're going to use indirect language. And how do you form indirect language or questions? You add a phrase in the beginning of your question. So these are some starting phrases, the ones that have been highlighted in bold, that can be added to simple questions to make it more polite, to make it more comfortable for your patients to hear, to make them more comfortable. For example, rather than asking directly, are you taking any medications at the moment? We could add, can you tell me? And then the question would become, can you tell me if you're taking any medications at the moment? And remember what we talked about in a lecture about beginning the OET speaking? Whenever you're asking a question, the intonation or the rise and fall. Intonation is the rise and fall in the volume of your voice. So the tone of my voice when I'm asking a question, it goes up towards the sentence. And I'll again demonstrate a second example for you. So second question is, how old are you? Rather than asking it straight up, how old are you or what's your age? I would add a starting phrase in bold. Would you mind? Would you mind telling me how old you are? Or would you mind telling me how old are you? So relatively, compared to the first example, it becomes more polite. Another phrase that you can use at the beginning is, tell me, and then begin your question. You don't have to say pause. It's in brackets, means you have to take a pause. So the question would sound like, tell me, how long have you been feeling like this? After tell me, you take a pause of 2 to 3 seconds. You can say, I wonder, if you want to be very polite when you're asking someone to do something or when you're asking them for their opinion or for information. I was just wondering if you would be able to answer some personal questions. Questions about weight, sexual history, about eating habits. These can be personal, and it's important to seek the patient's consent before you start probing into their personal lives. So this is one phrase which you can use when you're taking the history of a patient, maybe about the medical history or about the married life or about their reproductive history. So I wonder, and you can use it in several different ways. One way can be, I was just wondering if you would be able to answer some questions about your medical history. Another way could be, I'm wondering if you can tell me something about your eating habits. Or, I wonder if you could tell me something about your lifestyle. So see, there are three different ways of using this phrase. I was just wondering, or I'm wondering, or I wonder. And then you can add if wherever necessary. I would suggest you to just memorize these starting phrases and use them in a variety of ways when you're taking the history of a patient. Don't repeat one phrase. Don't just keep saying, can you tell me, can you tell me, can you tell me? No. Diversify the usage of the phrases. So use can you tell me as a starting phrase for one question, then move on to tell me, what about this? And then, okay, I'm wondering if you can tell me something about this. So use a variety of starting phrases in your OET speaking. Then another phrase is, can I ask? Can I ask if you drink alcohol? Or can I ask whether you smoke? And now that I'm discussing this question, I want to discuss this common mistake that students make. Students usually ask the patient if he or she is an alcoholic. That is wrong. Alcoholic is somebody who's a compulsive drinker, who compulsively drinks alcohol. That's like an addiction. And being an alcoholic or consuming alcohol are different things. So the question that you mean to ask the patient is, can I ask if you drink alcohol? And not, can I ask if you're an alcoholic? Another phrase can be, may I ask? May I ask some questions about your symptoms? Or may I ask you some questions before I discuss the treatment options with you? Or please tell me if you're allergic to something. Please tell me if you drink alcohol. Please tell me if you are married. Please tell me if you have any children. Please tell me if you're working at the moment, if you're employed at the moment. Then there is another phrase like tell me that we used earlier, and it has a pause. Let me ask you, what do you know about this condition so far? Can I ask if you're married? Can you tell me when the pain started? So see, these are some ways we have converted some direct questions to indirect questions. And I want you to use this in your OET speaking. Whenever you're taking history of a patient, whenever you have a function called ask questions about the patient's so and so, always use indirect questions. All right, quickly a revision. The phrases that you can use are, can you tell me? Or would you mind telling me? Or tell me? Or I wondered? Or I'm wondering? Or I wonder? Can I ask? Would you be able to tell me? May I ask? Please tell me. I wonder if you could tell me. Let me ask you. Can I ask? Can you tell me? These are some common phrases which I want you to remember and use them. Use them as the starting phrases before your questions. Next lecture would be about questioning techniques, the types of questions, things that you need to do and things that you need to avoid. And then perhaps after that, I will make another skill lesson about indirect language for giving instructions or for suggestions. So for now, you can just revise these phrases that we discussed. And I can share a cue card with you where you can apply this knowledge. So there's a cue card about a patient suffering from sleep apnea, and the patient's quite uncomfortable. We also have to ask questions about patients sleeping, about the patient's weight, because the patient's overweight and I think it's obese. So therefore the conversation can get a little tricky. It's on somewhat sensitive topics. Therefore, you will need to use indirect questions to elicit information.